Hi, boys and girls. Meteorologist Steve Caparata back with another episode of Cap's Corner Summer Camp. It's episode 3 for this summer. Today we're talking all about clouds, the clouds up above us, and precipitation. What is precipitation? That's rain, that's snow, that's sleet, that's hail. We'll get into it in just a moment. If you've been with me with these before, we're going to do a couple of different experiments today, so be sure to check it out. But first off, if we're going to get into clouds and precipitation, we need to understand the water cycle. And to understand the water cycle, we need to understand that water comes in 3 different forms. When it's in the form of ice, it's a solid, right? Now, the water that we drink or that comes out of a faucet, that's a liquid. And then water also comes in the form of a gas. You can probably most easily see this when mom or dad is boiling water on the stove. You might start to see some of that steam rising up. So that's when we've got water in the form of a gas or water vapor. So let's talk a little bit about the water cycle. This is really important in weather overall, but especially with clouds and precipitation. So step 1 in the water cycle is the sun heating up the ocean or heating up lakes, other bodies of water, and taking that liquid water as it heats up, it starts to change from a liquid to a gas. We call that evaporation. And once the water changes from a liquid to a gas, it starts rising up in the sky. Once it's evaporated, it starts rising up in the sky. As it gets higher up in the sky, guess what happens? It's warm down at the ground, but it gets colder and colder as that water vapor gets higher up in the sky. And as it gets colder, that helps the water vapor, the gas, change back into a liquid. We call that condensation. So we start to get drops of water forming up in the sky. And that's really where we start to see clouds developing. As those drops of water, it can be thousands and sometimes millions of tiny little drops of water that make up our clouds. And one question we get is, well, if clouds are made up of drops of water, how do they stay up in the sky? Well, because they're so small and they're so light, they can kind of stay suspended up there in the sky. And there's also some air pushing up on them from below a lot of times. But eventually, these little drops of water, if the cloud grows big enough, it gets higher up in the sky, these drops of water will start bouncing into each other, and the drops will get bigger and bigger. And guess what happens when they get bigger? They get heavier too, right? And once they get heavy enough, they start falling back down to the ground. We call that precipitation. So when it's liquid drops, that's rainfall. We'll get more into that in just a second. And then as that precipitation falls down to the ground, it starts to run off back into rivers and lakes and things like that. So that's the last step, runoff, where the water, the precipitation that falls from the sky ends up back in our rivers, our lakes, and our oceans. And then what happens is the process repeats itself all over again. That's why we call it the water cycle, okay? Because it happens nonstop, constantly, all around the earth. All right, let's take you into my home lab and give you a look at how you can see the water cycle in action pretty easily in your house. So here's what you're going to need to do this experiment. We need 4 plastic cups. We need some food coloring. If you got some blue food coloring, that works best or might look best for this experiment. Some shaving cream, get mom or dad to help out with that. Some water, an ice cube, and a marker. All right, so let's go check this out in the home lab, and then we'll come back to talk a little more about clouds and precipitation. Hey, boys and girls, we were just talking about the water cycle, so I'm going to show you how you can kind of see this in action at your house. Clara and Eliana, my girls, here to help me out once again. So for this first part, remember the first part of the water cycle is what? Evaporation, right? So we have a cup of water. It's about 3/4 of the way full. You can really kind of do whatever you want. All we're going to do in this first part is Clara's going to draw a line right about where the top of that water is on the cup. So Clara, go ahead and draw that line. And what we're going to do, we're going to kind of watch how this goes through time here, and this will probably take several hours. Now I'm going to give this to Eliana. She's going to walk this over. We want to try and put this by a window that gets some good sunlight and can really heat up. So Eliana's going to take this over to a window at our house. She's going to put this on this little table. And now that we have that line, we know where it was to start out. We're going to watch this. Now this one will probably take several hours, But if it works out and you get enough sunlight and you get enough heat, we should see that water level going down through time. That is evaporation. All right, so let's keep the water cycle going. So step 2 in the water cycle is what, girls?
Condensation.
Condensation. All right, here's how you can see condensation in action. So start now with a cup that's pretty full of some warm water. So get mom or dad to help with that. Eliana has a second cup. She's going to put that one on top, kind of like a lid on it. So Eliana, go ahead and do that. Put it on top. And now Clara has some ice cubes. So Eliana's going to hold that second cup in place. And Clara's going to get 1 or 2 of those ice cubes and put it on top of this cup that we just added. So there's 1 ice cube. And let's see if you can even fit a second one, because the more you can fit on here, the better it's going to work. What we should start seeing happening is as Clara gets another ice cube. All right, so she's got another cube on there. Do you see the cup starting to fog up? So what's happening here? So we started with some warm water at the bottom. And the first step in the water cycle is evaporation, right? Where we go from a liquid to a gas. Now, as that gas is rising up inside of the second cup, it's going back from a gas to a liquid, which is the second step, and it's called what?
Condensation.
Condensation. Why is that happening? Well, these ice cubes are cooling that gas as it comes in contact with the cup. And as we cool it, that helps it reach its dew point, which changes it back from a gas to a liquid, and we get condensation. So that is step number 2 in the water cycle. All right, guys, we've done steps 1 and 2 in the water cycle, so let's move on to the last step now. We're starting out with a cup of water. We got some shaving cream, and we've got some food coloring, some blue food coloring. Mom and Dad, again, might want to help out with this. Make sure we don't make too much of a mess. So Clara, first off, you're going to go ahead and put some shaving cream in that cup. So we're going to pretend this is our cloud here once we get the shaving cream all in there. So fill it up good. Keep going. Keep going. Fill up some of those gaps. Let's see. He's filling some of these gaps if we're not running out of the shaving cream. There you go. Keep going. Keep going. All right. That looks like a pretty good cloud. So we have our cloud now sitting here, and now Eliana's going to take some of that blue food color, and she's going to go ahead and put some drops in. So, Eliana, you got to turn it and squeeze it. Go ahead. All right, go ahead, put a few more. Keep going. Squeeze it, and squeeze it. Let's put one over here too. All right. So this is a little less on the science. Think of this a little more like a demonstration. But remember, when we talked about rain and precipitation, we talked about there are millions of little drops of water in the cloud, and they're kind of hung up in the sky for a while until they start colliding and they get heavy enough to fall down as rain or precipitation. So think about it that way. This food coloring here, once it's heavy enough to kind of fall through the cloud, it starts falling down as rainfall. So that's how you can see precipitation in action at home. All right, boys and girls, hopefully you got to try that out or get to try that out at home. But pretty easy to see the water cycle in action in your own house with just a few things that you probably have laying around. So clouds obviously are one of the things that result from the water cycle. Let's talk about the different types of clouds. Now, truthfully, there are dozens of types of clouds if we really wanted to get into it. But let's get into 3 main types of clouds to keep it kind of simple this morning. So I have them here on the picture. We have cirrus clouds, which are high up in the sky. These are actually made of ice crystals. Not drops of water, but they're made up of ice crystals. And then closer to the ground, a couple of different cloud types we have. We have stratus clouds. These are real flat, thin clouds. These are what we often see kind of our gray days. I'll show you a picture in a moment. And maybe the clouds that we see most often, cumulus clouds. These are our puffy white clouds. Now, when they're not too tall, they generally don't produce rain, but as they get taller and taller, those are the ones that will start to eventually produce some rainfall. So here's an example of a cirrus cloud or some cirrus clouds up in the sky. So again, these are really high up in the sky, and because they're so high up in the sky, high up in the atmosphere where it's really cold, they're made up of ice crystals. I think you can see here in the picture, they're pretty thin. We say they look kind of wispy, almost looks like something you would paint with a paintbrush. And cirrus clouds, for the most part, usually don't produce rainfall. All right, now here's what our stratus look like. So these are the days where you might step outside and it's just kind of dreary, kind of blah outside. The clouds are covering most or all of the sky. This is a good look at what stratus looks like. And we can get, a lot of times what we most often get out of the stratus clouds are maybe some light or moderate rain, something that's not too heavy. Now here's a real world example of what cumulus look like. Now we're in the summer months right now, and just about on any summer day here in South Louisiana, you will spot at least some cumulus clouds. So this is what they look like as they begin to develop, kind of puffy white clouds. They're not too tall, but if these things continue to grow higher and higher up, you can eventually get something that looks like this. Now, this is a dramatic example. This is what we call a cumulonimbus. Basically, it's a thunderstorm cloud, right? And so you can see this one has grown way up into the atmosphere. This is producing some heavy rain, and it could even produce some hail, some severe weather. This part that kind of extends out from the top of the storm, we call that the anvil. But that's what a thunderstorm would look like from the distance if you don't have a bunch of other thunderstorms kind of blocking your view. That is a cumulonimbus cloud. All right, let's head back into the home lab now, and I'm going to show you a really cool way, actually two different ways you can make a cloud. I kind of like the first method first, but it's going to depend on whether you have all these things to do it. So the first method, what we need is an empty 2-liter bottle, some rubbing alcohol, get mom or dad to help you with that, rubber stopper will help out, and a bike pump, an air pump if you have that. Now, if you don't have these things, we can also make a cloud with a water bottle. A smaller water bottle will work, and some water. So we can do an easier way too. I'm going to show you both of those with my girls. So let's head into the home lab, make a cloud at home, and we'll come back to talk a little more about precipitation. Hey boys and girls, we're back in the home lab now, and we were just talking about clouds, and I promised you I'd show you how to make a cloud at home. We're going to do it two different ways. Probably the first one's going to be a little more dramatic, but I think they're both pretty cool and not too hard. So we're going to start out with an empty 2-liter bottle. If mom and dad can help you out, this is rubbing alcohol. Don't do this on your own, but rubbing alcohol. I've got a funnel to help us get that in the bottle. And then what I've got is a little bicycle pump, but on the end of that, I have a rubber stopper for the moms and dads. I found this one at Home Depot for like $2. And I actually have the needle going through that rubber stopper. You'll see this in action in just a second. But first, Eliana, go ahead and put the funnel in the top of the bottle for me. I'm going to give her the rubbing alcohol and just squirt a little bit in the bottle. I'll tell you when. Go ahead. You can make sure you get it in the funnel. Keep going, a little more. Squeeze it a little bit. Okay, that's good. All right, so let's put the rubbing alcohol down. I got that. We're going to take the funnel off. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the top on the bottle. And Eliana, what I want you to do is kind of swish that around. So what we want to do is make sure we get the rubbing alcohol kind of swished. Just do it gently do it. Get it swished all around the bottle. All right, let me see the bottle. That looks pretty good. It looks like it's coated pretty good. So now we're going to take the top back off. Maybe not a bad idea for the kids to wear some safety glasses if you want to be extra safe with this. So now I'm going to stick that rubber stopper in there, and I'm going to put this down. Eliana, give it some pumps. Might do like that's 4, 5, 6, 7. All right, that's good. 8. All right. So we don't want to over pump this, boys and girls. We don't want this bottle to blow up, but watch what happens when I take this top out. In 3, 2. Whoa, do you see that? Do you see how we've got a cloud that's formed inside of our bottle? So what happened here? Well, when we started out with the rubbing alcohol in the bottle, the reason we used the rubbing alcohol instead of water, you can use water. Rubbing alcohol evaporates a little bit easier than water. So as we started putting that pressure in with the air pump, what we're doing is causing higher pressure, which warms things up in there and causes some evaporation. And then we build up all that pressure inside. When we release it by taking the pump out, then what you're doing is letting that air expand very quickly. As it expands, it cools, and then we go from having evaporation to changing back from a gas to a liquid, condensation. We get our cloud inside. So let's play this back one more time in slow motion and watch how it happens. All right, so here's another way you can do the same thing, make a cloud in a bottle that's a little bit easier. So again, I've already gone ahead and put some rubbing alcohol in this bottle. Eliana, go ahead and shake that up. We want to get the bottle all coated again, just like we did with the bigger 2-liter bottle. All right, let's see. That's good. So once you've got that bottle good and coated with the rubbing alcohol, moms and dads, you might want to try this one out first. We're going to take opposite ends, and we're going to twist in opposite directions on this water bottle. And it takes a little bit of strength to do it, okay? But we're doing the same thing as we did with the air pump. We're building up pressure. So now that we've twisted it, if you can see that, once I let go, whoa! You can see now we got a cloud. And then if I take the top off, can you see a little bit of that cloud coming out of the bottle? So it is the same concept. By twisting that bottle, we are increasing the pressure, we're heating up things inside, we get a little bit of evaporation, and then once you release that pressure, the air expands very quickly, it cools off, and you get some condensation. You get a cloud developing. All right, so there's 2 ways you can try to make a cloud at home. All right, boys and girls, hopefully you got to see how you can make a cloud at home. Pretty easy, right? And pretty cool. That's one of the experiments when I do it out at schools, when I go speak to kids. They always like that one. So clouds sometimes produce precipitation. Again, precipitation can be rain. It can be sleet. We'll talk about what that is in a moment. It can be freezing rain. It can be snow. It can be hail. Those are all types of precipitation that fall from clouds. So let's talk about that, how that happens. Now, precipitation, we start out with a cloud, as I talked about in the water cycle earlier. And most of you probably envision clouds or think about clouds as being made up of liquid water drops. But in reality, they often have both liquid water drops and some ice crystals or some form of ice within them. And it's real important for us to know in terms of what kind of precipitation we're going to end up with down here at the ground. We need to know what the temperatures are like between the cloud level up above us and all the way down here to the ground. And it's a little more complicated than you might think. So let me see if I can break it down for you, how we end up on, depending on what the day is, how we end up with rain, freezing rain, sleet, or snow. Now, in the summer months, we're going to have rain all the time, okay? If we get precipitation, it's going to be rain, or we might get hail. We'll talk about that in a moment. But we don't have to worry about this in the summer months. This is a winter issue when we talk about rain, freezing rain, sleet, or snow. But here's what we need to know as a meteorologist like me, somebody forecasts the weather, to understand what type we'll get. So to get rain, the temperature needs to be above freezing, basically all the way from the cloud down to the ground. That's what's shown here. The temperature is above freezing. So we have liquid water falling from the cloud and staying as a liquid all the way down to the ground. Now, it could be some ice up at cloud level that melts on the way down, but basically it's warm from the cloud down to the ground. To get freezing rain, we start out with that rain falling from the cloud, the liquid rainfall, falling through some air that is still above freezing, but close to the ground, there's a shallow layer of air that is below freezing. And what happens is those liquid water drops fall into the air that is below freezing, below 32 degrees. Those drops of water will start to freeze on contact with trees, with the road, on the grass, with any sort of objects. That is freezing rain. So it's liquid rain that reaches the ground, but then it freezes on contact with surfaces. The next type is sleet. So sleet, again, we're kind of starting out with some liquid raindrops here at cloud level. Could even start out with some snow, but it falls through some warm air. It melts, but then it hits a layer of air that is at or below freezing that's a bit thicker, and it then can refreeze before it hits the ground. So you might have liquid up here, but it refreezes before it hits the ground. It becomes basically small pieces of ice. That is sleet. And then the type that maybe you boys and girls wish for the most, and that doesn't happen all that often in our part of the world, would be snow. But basically, in very simple terms, to get snow, our precipitation needs to start out as snow at cloud level and stay snow all the way to the ground. And for that to happen, the temperature from the cloud level all the way to the ground has to be at or below freezing, at or below 32. So hopefully that makes some sense on how we end up with whether it be liquid rain, sleet, freezing rain, or snow. Let's talk about one more precipitation type before we wrap it up. So hail, okay? So when we have a thunderstorm, I'm going to let this graphic cycle back one more time. But when we have a thunderstorm, within that storm we have something called the updraft, and that is air blowing up into the cloud, into the storm. Here's our updraft, okay? And so that's carrying some moisture up into the cloud, and we get our precipitation starting to form, our drops of water. They'll freeze up here. Some of those will freeze if they get high enough up into the cloud in the atmosphere, and they start trying to fall down to the ground. But if they're not heavy enough, and they get caught in that updraft, they might kind of cycle through the cloud here a few times. And as what starts out as those liquid drops of water, they freeze and become hail. And as the hail starts to fall down, if it cycles back into the cloud, it'll gather some more water. That may refreeze, and that'll make our piece of ice bigger and bigger, depending on how many times it cycles through the cloud until it finally gets heavy enough to overcome that updraft and fall down to the ground as hail. So we can get hail even when the weather is warm outside. We absolutely get hail in the summer months because up above us in those big thunderstorms, they get so high up into the sky, so high up into the atmosphere where it's much colder, the ice forms up there and falls down to the ground eventually as hail. That happens in our really strong and severe storms. All right, coming up next week, we will talk about this. That is weather radar. Now, that's Hurricane Ida from last year, but that is Ida on radar. So we're going to teach you all about radar, how to understand what you're looking at when you see something like that, what all the colors mean, how radar works, and some of the different and neat things we can see on radar. All right, if you're watching live on Facebook, go ahead and if you have any questions about what we talked about today, go ahead and pop them in the comments. I'll try to answer a few of your questions, and then again, we'll be right back here next week to talk more about weather radar. All right, guys, hopefully you learned a little bit about clouds and precipitation in today's lesson. So that's going to wrap it up. I didn't see many questions rolling in. I had one question from Monique asking if this is going to continue all summer. So that was lesson 3 of 8 that we just had today. We've got 5 more to go. Scheduled every Monday, although as I started this at the beginning of the summer, I didn't look close enough at the calendar to realize that next Monday is the 4th of July. So stay tuned. I may move that lesson. I haven't quite decided yet. We'll let you know when the next week's lesson on weather radar is going to air. So that might be Monday at 10, or we might move it back. But the remainder of those lessons should be every Monday at 10 o'clock. I'm going to take one more peek down just to make sure we don't have any questions rolling in before we wrap up. So I'll remind you, you can find all of these lessons on our website, wafb.com/capscorner. There also, if you scroll down a little bit to each of these lessons, I've got some worksheets. We should have the worksheets for today's lessons posted soon. A couple of new worksheets. You can see the other 2 lessons we've done so far this summer also there. You can also watch them on YouTube or on WAFB Plus if you want to kind of watch them on a bigger screen and you didn't get to catch those live. But peeking down, not seeing more questions rolling in. So we'll go ahead and wrap it up for now. And again, we'll see you next week. Date and time to be determined. I'll make an announcement later on this week to let you know when that one will be coming up.